Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of Learning with My Rabbis. I'm really pleased with tonight's guest. You've gotten to hear from many different rabbis that I've learned from or that I've studied with or have mentored me throughout the years, but there's probably one rabbi I've learned the most from, because for the last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of serving with him in our wonderful community, Beth Tikvah. So I want to welcome Rabbi Jarrod Grover to the program. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi Lewis.
Now, as we dive in, we'll really do it just like we would with anyone else, but it's a pleasure to have you with us. And our first question is something that I don't know I've really had the chance to talk to you about, despite we've talked about many different things in our years together. But why is it that you decided to become a rabbi to begin with? What brought you to the rabbinate?
Okay, how much time you have for that answer? I'll try and be brief with that. First of all, I think this is a fantastic series, and it was your idea. I didn't have anything to do with its conception nor with its production, so I want to wish you a yasher koach for putting it all together. I've seen not every episode, but most of the episodes, and I get to learn from your rabbis. Many of them I didn't have the chance to study with because we both went to different rabbinical schools, and the format just works really, really well for the times we are in and the limited access we have to learning from real people. So this is great. Thank you for finally asking me to be on this with you. My story, I for some reason was a kid who loved Judaism from a very, very young age. There are pictures of me in kindergarten with a tallis on. There was something about synagogue and the tradition that always excited me and captivated me and had me interested. I think part of that was my late grandfather on my mother's side. He passed away when I was young, but when he passed, the family didn't know what to do, because he was the one who had the Jewish knowledge. He knew how to run the Seder. He knew how to do Kiddush. And I was the oldest grandchild, and I was going to Solomon Schechter Day School in Montreal at the time. And these are the things you learn. You know, you learn how to do a model Seder in early grades of elementary school. You learn how to do Kiddush. And so it became a habit that little Jarrod would run the Kiddush and little Jarrod would run the Seder. And this sort of grew to become a cute thing where eventually little Jarrod was blowing the shofar at Temple Emmanuel, where we went to services on the high holidays in Montreal. And my family really was very encouraging every time I did something in the community. And I think that interest grew and grew. I don't think I ever really thought I would pursue the rabbinate. But when I went to college, I saw in the United States that Judaism was really in crisis, and that I maybe took for granted growing up, going to Jewish day school, really all the way through high school. I took for granted everything I knew. And in Montreal, as a very high percentage of the Jewish community goes to day school. And you go to the States and you realize that me, who knew nothing about Judaism, compared to the kinds of Jews that I was meeting at an Ivy League college in New Jersey, I was like the Albert Einstein of Judaism. They knew nothing. You know, they went to Hebrew school, some joke of a Hebrew school, and did the minimum. And then I started meeting kids who were like half Jews and quarter Jews, and Jews who weren't really interested in learning about Israel or really identifying as Jewish at all. And I never, ever met Jews like this before. And they started looking at me like a rabbi, even though I sort of never asked for it, but because I guess I was one of the ones who knew more, they started looking to me as a rabbi. And as I started to get to know them better, as I said, I got the sense that Judaism in North America was really in crisis, um, assimilation being the biggest factor in that crisis. So I looked at the kinds of rabbis that were trying to stem the tide, and I really was not impressed. I think there were a lot of rabbis who could not communicate with my generation. And eventually, you have to say, um, if I'm only for myself, what kind of life is this going to be? So I did try out working. Um, I did try out working on Wall Street, and I had fun, but it wasn't for me. Uh, this was the calling that I felt deep down really spoke to me and would help me live a life of purpose, which I wanted to live. Um, and I haven't looked back since. I love my job. I would do it for free, but just don't tell the board that I would do it for free. Well, I guess this is going to be public anyway. Okay, I wouldn't do it for
Don't
free.
worry, nobody watches this anyway,
You'll
so it's
edit that
okay.
part.
Nobody watches this anyway. It's interesting. I had no idea that you at one point spent some time on Wall Street. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I don't talk about it because what is it? It's like the biggest thing I'm fighting against now is just the greed of the world and the worship of materialism. And I looked at my life, and look, there are some people who are really good at it and really do help people. So I don't want to disparage everybody in the industry, but I'm just speaking for myself. I looked at myself at the end of the day and said, well, what did I do today? I helped rich people get richer. Is that the kind of thing I want to, is that the kind of thing I want to look back on every day? Or do I have other skills that aren't being utilized that would help me at the end of the day feel a little bit more satisfied? I'm one of the rabbis who grew up in the first days of Chabad on campus. Hillel used to run the show, and Hillel in my day was just a disaster. I think they were transitioning from a time when students ran everything. That was sort of the Hillel model, is they would provide the structure and the funding, but the students would really run the programs, and transitioning to a time where the students really had no interest in running the programs or didn't know how to run the programs, and they had to invest a lot more themselves. But they hadn't gotten there yet when I was in school. Chabad was already there. They were there 20 years before, right? Get into a community and make a Jewish home for them. And the Chabad rabbi at Princeton also had a big influence on my decision, not only to become a rabbi, but to become a conservative rabbi. I never thought that I would be observant, even though I love Judaism. Without, I think, Chabad's influence, I don't think I would have insisted on being in a movement that prioritized Shabbat and Kashrut and the mitzvot in general. Chabad was that force, I think, and continues to be that force that challenges students on this idea that they have to go to bed at night feeling proud of what they did and proud of their identity, and letting that Jewish light inside of them be fed on a regular basis. And when you have that in your life, like I had, it feels good. And something I wanted to share with others that Wall Street really didn't allow me to express.
Well, that's another interesting part of the story because I believe you grew up, it was a Reform synagogue, and I grew up in a conservative synagogue.
Yeah,
But similarly, it was my first experiences with Chabad when I was in high school that I really started to take on observance, and was first presented with that really as a model of things. It was not something I saw particularly around the conservative synagogue, even in Los Angeles, in terms of Shabbat or
yeah.
Kashrut and things like that. It was Chabad that exposed me to it, and a lot of my compatriots from my USY and from the conservative movement, we started spending a lot of time on Shabbat afternoons and other days with the local Chabad rabbi. You mentioned before that when you went to Princeton, you saw kind of American Judaism in crisis. So I'm curious, what really are the big differences? Because you spend your summers in the States as well, so you get to see synagogue life there. What are the big differences between conservative Judaism or Judaism in general here in Canada versus in the US?
To me, it's about level of literacy. That's what I care about. That to me is the shocking difference. When you go to, and unfortunately, the trends in Canada are going the wrong way. But this is why we have to invest in Jewish day schools and make sure the day schools are strong. Let kids make their own choices. You can't nowadays. It's a free world. You can't force kids to be religious or not. But when you don't teach them, when you don't give them Hebrew, when you don't give them access to Jewish history and Jewish literature, a sense of understanding, it is of their heritage. It is very, very hard when you're 21 and 22, which is when you might figure out, hey, I should learn more about my heritage. Do you know how much ground you have to recover? It's much harder to learn a language by the time you're in your 20s. You know, Hebrew is the biggest thing. Hebrew is the key to everything. It's much harder to learn that when you're in your 20s than it is when you're even in your teens. And so, look, I feel for the Hebrew afternoon schools. They have a tough job keeping these kids interested after school and, 3 hours a week or whatever it is now. But my friends mostly had that kind of education, Hebrew education. And look, I might get in trouble for saying it, but some of these Hebrew schools are a joke. And they try, and I know they're doing their best. But if you just gave me those kids on a weekly basis, one-on-one tutoring, in 1 year, I could do what they do in 6 years, because the kids are so disruptive and they're not happy to be there. And when you have a one-on-one opportunity to teach a kid like we do when they come to bar mitzvah lessons, I think through that relationship, you can convey a much greater sense of appreciation for Judaism than you can in these classroom settings. So, look, that to me is the biggest issue. I wish that we had a better system in the U.S. for funding of Hebrew day schools. The numbers I hear, the tuition fees I hear, I understand why parents are choosing not to send their kids there. You need to spend half your salary just on tuition, but that's a terrible situation. And this is to me, you want to fix some of the problems that I think are leading to this crisis. That's number one.
It's important. I know for myself, Hebrew's always and continues to be a struggle because I got it in one of those 3 days a week after school programs where we learned to sound out words, but not what anything meant. So it meant that all the corpus of Jewish literature was locked away from me. I couldn't get to it except for what was available in a translation. And only in my late 20s in rabbinical school, when I started to really learn Hebrew, it's still been something that's been difficult, is getting access to that in the direct way. So I
Right.
100% agree. If there was one thing that I think would be incredibly beneficial, it would be for every Jewish child to have access to those texts, to have the language skills to be able to, whenever it was in life they got interested, being able to open them up.
And let them make the choice later. Not every child's going to choose to be observant, but you don't give them a choice when you don't give them the tools, the access. It's like giving somebody a library, but not the key to the front door. What good is it?
Absolutely. I see with conversion students how uncomfortable sometimes they are when they first start coming to synagogue because they don't know when to stand, when to sit, all of those types of things. But I think there are also a lot of Jews that feel the same way because they never went or they haven't gone in 20, 30 years. And it makes it that much harder to get back in because, again, you don't have that basic knowledge that lets you feel as part of the in crowd.
Yeah, well, that's a different issue. We've got to work on creating synagogues that are welcoming to people, whether they know a little or know a lot. And we can work on that. And there's some fantastic models out there for a sort of beginner introduction to Judaism. But as I said, it is a lot harder to make up all that ground later in life than it would have been had that person been studying and on the path from a young age. This is the greatest strength of orthodoxy, right? And this is not me who's inventing this. Everybody says it. The greatest decision that the Orthodox made as they saw their numbers dwindle in the 70s was invest in Jewish education, insist on Jewish education. And through that, they created a community that is strong, and I believe it's flourishing. And there's no reason why the conservative movement couldn't replicate this. We have replicated it in many different cities, but it's just on a much smaller level. The vast majority, I think, of our youth are still going to non-Jewish day schools. Not in Toronto. I'm talking across the movement. Non-Jewish, public. I mean public schools, or private non-Jewish schools, non-Jewish day schools.
I wanted to ask you, Rabbi, right? What are some of the challenges as you see that are facing conservative Judaism?
What I would say is, I'll give you the main one. We are a movement that tries to hold competing, sometimes opposite ideas in tension, balancing the tradition with an openness to the world and to progress and to modernity. Holding ideas in tension, contrasting ideas in tension, is not part of the ethos of 2020. Today, the spirit of the times in liberal circles is you buy into a certain sense, to a certain number of beliefs that relate to who is a victim and who is an oppressor, and the kinds of things that are worthwhile and the kinds of things that are not worthwhile. There's a whole list of kinds of beliefs that you have to have on the left. And most of our congregants in North America would define themselves as progressive and liberally minded. And so synagogue and Judaism, their fealty to and appreciation for Judaism is sometimes mocked in those circles because religion is old-fashioned and it's an oppressor of victims. And in that mentality, which I think is increasingly totalitarian in the sense of if you don't buy into these beliefs, you're out, I think is a real threat for conservative Judaism on the left. It's also a threat for Zionists too, because Zionism, Israel is also on the list of oppressors. And if you love Israel, those who want to be accepted in liberal circles have to stay quiet about their feelings and pretend perhaps that Israel is not important to them, and pretend that their national heritage, that their identity as a Jew is not important to them. So they sort of hide it in the background. That same thing exists on the right too. If you want to challenge ideas on the right, you can also be branded and kicked out. There is a totalitarian mentality, I think, on both sides, an extremism on both sides that is pushing people away from balance and tensions and more into the thinking of what camp am I in? And you can't be in two camps. You're either blue or red. And we're a movement that's purple. And we're not, I think, because of that, we're suffering. Our numbers are suffering. And I don't know what it is that we can do. I'm not, you know me, Rabbi Sachs, I'm not somebody who thinks we should become something else in order to remain popular. I think conservative Judaism as an ideology is what we're here to spread, what we're here to preserve. And that means staying true to our beliefs and ignoring a little bit of the spirit of the times, um, in order to make sure that when the times change, we're still here to welcome back those who I think want a more sophisticated way of looking at the world and some of the challenges that modernity poses.
It's interesting. Rabbi Artson used to always tell us in our rabbinical school, and people would lament the numbers, that he very much would rather have a smaller movement where people really believed
Yeah,
in the principles than have millions of people but had no idea really what it was they were joining.
right. Conservative Judaism was here at a particular moment in the 50s and 60s where it was the exact thing that new American Jews wanted, or second generation American Jews wanted. It was the exact Judaism that they were looking for. Uh, did they buy into the beliefs of the movement? No, but they felt that here was a synagogue that my parents would feel comfortable in, but that I could also feel comfortable in and consider myself fully American or fully Canadian. Today, the needs of the day are different. And I think what Rabbi Artson is saying is very wise. Maybe it's best to have a movement with people who are not there because this is what they want, but there because this is what they believe. That's a different thing.
I got in trouble a couple of times when, rather flippantly in rabbinical school, I said that the biggest difference between conservative and reform Judaism, a synagogue at least, is what rabbinical school the rabbis went to, because I see very little difference between the congregants. Here, I've noticed in Toronto more so than I saw in LA. But similarly, at the end of the day, I think most people that are members of a conservative synagogue aren't really familiar with the ideology, the philosophy behind the movement. So I'm wondering if, in just a brief bit, you could give us your own elevator pitch of what it is you see conservative Judaism really as meaning. How is it different from Reform or Reconstructionists on things on the left, and how is it different from Orthodoxy and even liberal Orthodoxy on the right?
To me, I think the concept of mitzvah, right, that is maybe the fundamental idea in Judaism, uh, should not be replaced simply because we're in modernity, right? To me, that's the main difference between conservative Judaism as an ideology and Reform Judaism. I don't believe in this freedom of choice stuff or even an enlightened choice. I believe in the concept of mitzvah. I believed in Averah. There are things that you have to do. There are things that are sins. There are 613 mitzvot that God gave us, and we are required to observe them. And if we don't, it's considered a sin. I mean, to me, that is fundamental at the root of Judaism. It's not something I'm going to say from the bima. You're sinning, and you're sinning, and you're sinning. But if you get the message of the drashot, it's I think we are encouraging more observance among our congregants in a very different way than you'll find in a Reform synagogue. In Reform synagogues, they might find you on social justice projects encouraging people to observe more. But we do that too, but social justice is one of the causes that we want to further from the Bima, and we'll emphasize ritual to a greater degree, I think.
What about
And
on the right? Where do you see it differing from Orthodoxy?
Look, to me, I think we are honest in the way we see Judaism as a historical process. I think Orthodox Jews are honest about the reverence we have to give to rabbis to determine what the halacha might be. But where they stop short is when you ask them, well, why that rabbi? Why him? Well, because he's the most knowledgeable. Well, who gave him the SAT test to find out that he's the well? He's a gadol. He learned from here and there. You know, I think there's an idea in Orthodoxy that these gedolim, the people that, and by the way, there are many different ones, and there's many different camps. There's no really such thing as Orthodoxy. There's many different camps, and these gedolim make changes too. Just more nowadays, most of the changes they're making are to the stringent side rather than to the lenient side. So we're honest in saying, look, we have our gedolim in the conservative movement. A couple of them you've interviewed, Rabbi Sachs. But we're honest that there is much in Judaism that is adaptable when you have someone who's really knowledgeable both in the ways of the world and in Jewish law. And that gives a great degree of flexibility to those who know. I don't see that same honesty in Orthodoxy. I think there's much more of a reverence for the gadol as someone who keeps things rigid and firm. When in actual fact, you know, there's much written about Das Torah, right? The fact that we've just handed over the tradition to many of these rabbis or rabbis and allowed them to manipulate it in whatever way they see fit, because they're gedolim and they can do so. So I guess the big difference between us and them is I have my gedolim and they have theirs, right? They have their rabbis that they look to, and I have mine. And on the questions of the day that I really care about, which tend to be more the questions of human dignity and how we reconcile those issues with a tradition that challenges some modern conceptions of human dignity, I have trusted and I have confidence in the responses of my gedolim, and many of them have found ways that Judaism can be flexible in those areas. And I'm not going to say that's important to me, and so that's why I choose them. What I'm going to say is I believe that the halachic process allows it. So if the halachic process allows it, why not make allowances for more people to feel valued and important parts of the community?
I love what you said before about who gave them the SAT test, because it's always struck me. I love the phrase, the expression, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I don't think I'm any smarter than any rabbi that lived centuries and centuries ago. I mean, what Rashi and Rambam and some of these rabbis knew, it really blows my mind what they could hold in their heads. But just given technology, I know about germ theory and evolution, and I have in my fingertips all of their works, plus the works of thousands and thousands of other people. Not that I'm saying that I'm one of the gedolim of our generation, but that our generation, I think, certainly has more knowledge as a whole than these previous generations.
That's
and
right.
It's not in spite of them, it's because of them, of what they've gifted us. Each generation is going to naturally have more.
That's right. And just think about it, you know, who gave them the SAT test and what's on their SAT test? Okay, listen, if their SAT test is totally Gemara, I'm guessing they're going to get 100%. But in order to be a halachist, you don't have to just know Gemara. That's crazy. You have to know science. You have to know sociology. You have to know people. You have to know technology even. All these things. I mean, just think about it. You answer a question, can you use electricity on Shabbos? Well, you need to know something about electricity in order to make the decision about whether it's allowed or whether it's not allowed. And those all need to be components on SAT tests too. And yet these gedolim, you know, didn't go to college, don't have science degrees in many cases. And I know gedolim that do have that knowledge. And by the way, you see it now with Corona. You know, there's this, I don't want to disparage anybody, but there's this very, very important rabbi in Israel who said it's forbidden to get a Corona test. You saw that?
I missed that one.
I mean, this is the kind of crazy stuff you hear. And you say, well, they're all going to listen to him because he's the Gadol, and I'm sure he knows a lot about Judaism, but he obviously knows nothing or is just choosing to be ignorant of science. It's very important you get tested for corona so you can get the heck away from other people and stop spreading it to everybody else. And look, part of the reason why I think there's been an overwhelming number of cases in the Orthodox world is because it took a little bit of time for these Gedolim to realize they better stop looking to the Gemara for answers and start turning to doctors and scientists for answers. And that we should have Gedolim in our community who from the beginning have that knowledge in that respect, not after people start dying and they realize, oh, I guess we should listen to a doctor or two.
So when Rabbi Roth was on the show, one of the comments he made was that he really sees conservative Judaism, not necessarily as it's practiced in many places, but as a philosophy, the way it was envisioned, as the authentic form dating back, right, in connection with the sages of the Talmud and the great rabbis of the past. Yeah. Would you share that thought?
I do, but I don't think orthodoxy is inauthentic. That's where I disagree with him. I think we use the same tools that have been at the disposal of Gedolei Yisrael, of the sages of Israel, for, since the time of the Talmud. But just because you have a wrench, it doesn't mean you know which way to turn the screws and which screws to turn. In other words, we're turning the screws in a particular direction. They're also turning the screws in a particular direction. Don't kid yourself. They're turning to the right when we sometimes are turning to the left. So I don't disparage the Orthodox, God forbid, and say that they're inauthentic. They're authentic. But they have rabbis who are responding to the changes in the world in a way that I don't think is humane sometimes, I don't think is necessary, choosing to be stringent when you have the option to be lenient. The whole, the question is, at the end of the day, how do I decide where to affiliate myself? And I've made the decision about where I feel comfortable, but unfortunately, when you look at the trends in the world, I'm not blind to the fact that the way we turn the wrenches isn't resulting in a movement that is strong and flourishing, right? There is much to think about, especially for you, Rabbi Sachs, when you consider how sometimes turning the screws to the right or leaving them be might be the right way to go to keep people engaged and strong. Religion nowadays is about giving people security in an insecure world. You don't make people feel secure when the screws are constantly moving in different directions. When you leave them as is or when you tighten them, people feel safe. And I think that can explain some of the growth, the ideological growth, for a movement that has not been as flexible as we have, but nonetheless has been more popular.
Well, it's interesting going back to how both of us, Chabad was an influence in us becoming more observant and becoming conservative rabbis. But in my own experience, many of my peers from the conservative movement that also were hanging out at that Chabad house with me, most of them now are either Orthodox rabbis or Orthodox congregants. Yeah. Very few of them stayed as just conservative congregants. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, on how as conservative Jews take on more mitzvot and become more observant, right? What some would call maybe the success stories of our movements, they tend to move movements actually and to not stay in the conservative movement.
Yeah. Well, we have a challenge. Conservative movement has these, we're going through a period of transition now. We have these big legacy institutions that cost a lot of money to run and that still have congregants that enjoy attending, and they also are very increasingly time consuming, I would say, to sustain. You know, everything that our board is spending time on. I mean, I look at the city issues and the planning and changing the bathrooms and everything that a board does. And that's not even the fundraising aspect. How to adjust dues and how we implement live streaming. All of these big questions that you need in order to sustain a legacy institution, and you have to prioritize what it is that you do. One of the things that I think we do well at compared to other synagogues is we try and engage a younger crowd and have some avenues for them to grow Jewishly through our classes and through our programs. But in general, we could be doing a whole lot more. I mean, I'd like more rabbis at my disposal to do classes that can appeal to across generations and that can create social bubbles for different ages and viewpoints and interests. That would be great. And I know there's a number of synagogues, even one in Toronto, that's experimenting with that idea, and I'm watching and trying to learn from them. We are transitioning towards a model where I think our work is going to look a lot more like the work of our colleagues who are Chabad Shluchim. And that's a good thing. Smaller, more intimate, individual relationships with everybody. And I think that's a model that's going to be sustainable, where you don't have to worry so much about sustaining an institution, and instead you can invest more time in person to person. That's our job. It has always been about people. We just got distracted and continue to get distracted by bricks and mortar and money.
I think it's an important lesson to refocus on the people that make up our communities. On that subject of lessons, I'm curious, you graduated rabbinical school how many years ago now?
2009, so it's
2009.
11, 12 years ago.
So I'm curious, in those years, are there things you learned that you think really are fundamental to being a rabbi in this day and age that they never taught you in rabbinical school?
What I would say is there are some people who say, oh, rabbinical school should teach more pulpit skills and congregational skills. No, it shouldn't. The rabbinical school should be spending all of its time on Judaism, Jewish literacy, everything from study of Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Mishnah Torah, Gemara, everything. JTS, I was there 5 years. I got a great education in those subjects, but we could have done a lot more. I wish there had been more classes available in Midrash, and just that's what we should be doing. This should be an immersive experience in Jewish text study. And the pulpit skills, Rabbi Sachs, let's be honest. First of all, those who teach, and those who do. We don't get the best pulpit skills from those who are necessarily our teachers in rabbinical school. And the other thing is, there are some natural gifts that people have and talents, and for many, the pulpit will not be the best place for them to serve the Jewish people. Let's put it that way. Why should we force people to go to rabbinical school and learn pulpit skills? Maybe your calling is to be a textile manufacturer. But when you're making textile manufacturers, you're doing so with wisdom, the wisdom of Judaism that you got in rabbinical school, right? And you'll find ways to be a blessing to the Jewish people on that path. Maybe you'll become, advisor to the president or something, or who knows?
It's a very interesting point, because I think of how like the Yeshiva University's rabbinical school set up in terms of price. I think even to when I did some work as a rabbinical student with clergy from other seminaries and other faiths, and they were shocked both at the number of years of rabbinical school, but more so at the price of it.
Yeah.
And I remember back my entering year, I had a lot of classmates that wanted to go into day schools or into working at Hillel and other things. But by the time rabbinical school ended, when people started looking at their student loans, it really was that the pulpit was where everybody wanted to go as the only viable way to really pay off that kind of debt. Versus I look at the Yeshiva University, where their rabbinical program has so many people who do it just to learn and then go become doctors or lawyers or other things.
Yeah.
So when you talk about Jewish education, when you're talking about younger, I know you're focused on day school, but do you have any thoughts on reinvesting to make rabbinical school more affordable to both attract candidates and to say to candidates,
I don't know.
go
Next
where you're
question. I'm
best?
not good with this stuff. I don't know about rabbinical school. I have enough trouble managing my own job, my own life, my own congregation. I don't know. Leave that. Call Rabbi Nevins, Rabbi Peretz. They'll tell you about different funding models for rabbinical school. I don't even know what rabbinical school is. Rabbinical school is a fake thing, right? All I know is learning about Judaism, Jewish literacy. The more, the better. And there should be paths for people who have an interest in it that's at an advanced level, just like there is in economics or in veterinary sciences or in biology. You can get a PhD. So we should have schools and institutions, and we should be supporting those that offer those advanced ways of pursuing a degree in Jewish knowledge. If you want to call that rabbinical school, call it rabbinical school.
So to push you back to the original question, then, without saying that, it's clear you think that we should be focusing on the Jewish studies in school, not pulpit skills. But what are some of the things that you learned as a rabbi in the field? Are there any lessons that you attribute to just learning on the job that you think
the
are
best
important?
Experience I had in rabbinical school was when the great Rabbi Michal Shekel, Michal Shekel's the executive director. She's also a great rabbi. She's the head of the Toronto Board of Rabbis. Michal Springer was my associate dean, and she got me interested in pastoral skills. Pastoral skills does not mean speaking from the pulpit. It means going to a hospital at somebody's bedside and trying to give them comfort when they're suffering and in pain. And we are required at JTS to do a certain number of hours in pastoral care, and I really struggled with it. And it was through that struggle that Rabbi Springer encouraged me to do it more, suffer more, because the ones who suffer are the ones who need it. The ones who enjoy the experience of being there at the bedside, they're okay. When I was afraid of hospitals and nervous to go up to strangers and ask them how they're feeling today. And I think the greatest, and I did it here in Toronto, by the way, thanks to the Wolf and Flat families, two wonderful families that sponsored the Pastoral Fellowship Program at the Jewish Theological Seminary. They helped me pursue the program in Toronto, and that changed, not forget the rabbinate, it changed me as a person. And I look back on all the skills I learned doing that program, and I have a certificate that I hang proudly on my wall, a chaplaincy certificate, to remind me how precious life is, how humble one must walk through the world, how humbly one must walk through the world, and what we're really here to do, what a rabbi really is here to do. And sometimes it's not to teach people, sometimes it's just to be with other people. The gift of presence. Thank you.
Well, we had some hours required in Ziegler, but it was one of the things I was most nervous about when I first joined Beth Tikvah. I definitely, watching you do those types of visits and going with you to visit people both in the hospital and in Shiva, really did teach me a lot about my technique versus you, which really seemed to be to dive in, to address the elephant in the
That's what
room,
I try and do. I don't
to
dance around the issue. The biggest thing it teaches you when you have to visit 80 people a day in the what do you call it? The ward where people are dying. Why am I forgetting?
palliative care. Or,
Palliative. Thank you. The palliative care ward. Um, when you got to visit everybody there, you don't have time to wait around and build up the guts to walk in the room. You open up the door. How you doing today? You if they don't want to see you, they don't want to see you. But you're there, and you have to be sort of you have to walk in and accept what you're going to get from this person and smile and and at the end of the day you might build a relationship that'll last uh, and that you will remember forever.
the last question, the question that we ask every guest on our program, is there a piece of Torah that's been significant to you, a piece of Torah that's really impacted you over the years in an important way?
There's a lot, but let me end with one that I have found particularly important for me and that I hope your listeners also can learn from. It's a quote from Pirkei Avot, Ezehu Chacham. How do you define the wise person? Halomed Mikol Adam. It's somebody who tries to learn from everybody. When I look at my life and why I became a rabbi, I took pieces from this person I met and pieces from another person I met and a reform rabbi that I found really compelling and wise. But also, you heard me talk about a Chabad rabbi that I also found to be important in my life, and try to put it all together. So it's a quote that means a lot to me, and I think a quote that the world needs to hear more of today. You shouldn't just watch CNN. You shouldn't just watch Fox News. You shouldn't just read the National Post. You shouldn't just read the Toronto Star. Try and learn from everybody, even if that learning is why you disagree with them. Uh, Judaism is an idea, and uh, the pursuit in life of ideas that matter, we believe, end up shaping behavior and thereby impacting the whole world around us. So make sure you know who you are, and hopefully through that, the life you live can be that blessing unto others. And I think that's about learning from every person.
It's a great lesson. It's both topical in the sense of the problems we see politically with people refusing to hear anything that they disagree with,
Right.
but also, as this is our last episode of Learning with My Rabbis now as we prepare for the high holidays, which has been about me sharing all the different teachers and mentors I've had the opportunity of studying with over the years. So it's a great, I think, way to conclude, particularly since you, tonight's guest, are the rabbi that I've had the opportunity to learn the most from. I've gotten to be with different rabbis in classes, or they mentored me here or there, and internships and other programs. But getting to work side by side with you for the past 3 years, getting to learn from you has really been a treat, as well as getting all of the opportunities and experiences that you've allowed me to have, which I think have also been tremendous learning, just getting to be thrown into things. So having you there as that source of support's really been a pleasure. So it's so wonderful that we got to share you on this show. So thank you very much, Rabbi, for being with us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for being
And
such an awesome associate. And it's my privilege to be able to work with you every day.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Sometime not on camera, I'll have to ask you what it is you've learned from me, but I'm afraid right now to hear the answer.
I've learned a lot from you. I have to tell everybody, you talk about learning from everybody. That means even when your associate rabbi disagrees with you and you have the power to shut him up, I could say to him, Louis, be quiet. I'm the senior rabbi. I I say the way things are going to be. I always let Rabbi Sachs challenge me. We don't agree on a lot of things, and I don't want to make it seem like we're opposite on everything. I think we agree on most things, but I think he likes pushing me, and I like pushing him, and I like listening to what he has to say. So give yourself credit. You have helped me always to refine the way I think we should be shaping our community here at Beth Tikvah.
I appreciate it. It really has been wonderful that you've allowed me to sometimes more verbally than I probably should disagree with you in private, as well as that you've also challenged me in my own beliefs and helped me to grow and think about things differently. So I always appreciate that. So thank you so much for all of that. Thank you for being on, and thank you to everybody else for tuning in, for joining us for another episode of Learning with My Rabbis. This is the end of the series, at least for now, and we'll see what happens in the future. So thank you all so much for helping to make it possible.
And we wish everybody k'tiva v'chatima tova, a happy and good year for everyone.
Amen.
Don't love God.
If you don't love your neighbor, if you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try